You've written that the human sense of right and wrong has evolved. If we have a moral instinct, why did it evolve? What are the advantages?
So the question of why a moral instinct evolved can be thought about in two different ways. There's sort of the why of what would the evolutionary advantage be of a moral instinct, and then there's the question of why in terms of sort of just the mechanisms of how it actually gets worked out in the brain. The why on the evolutionary side, I think we're left with sort of stories at some level, but if you think about what we know about non-human primates, our evolutionary ancestors in some sense, what you can see there are various kinds of social rules that help cohere cooperation and reduce severe violence within a social group. So non-human primates, monkeys and apes, as well as many other species, have dominance hierarchies. And dominance hierarchies serve to give structure to social relationships so that there's less ambiguity than there might be if there were no hierarchy. So if I know that animal A is higher ranking than me, then when I see food, I know fairly well that A will take the food if he's interested, and I will not be able to take it. So it serves a cooperative kind of glue for any kind of society, and animals at some level seem to respect those hierarchies. Now, of course, just like in human societies, dominance hierarchies often get shuffled as B decides, I don't like that A is higher ranking than me, forms a coalition with C because B and C together are much better than B alone, and B and C together overthrow A goes below C, and now B and C are numbers 1 and 2. So it's not that these hierarchies or these social norms reduce any kind of conflict in general, but they do give some sense of stability to a group. So I think that's one evolutionary story which is at least consistent with what we see in animal societies, that various kinds of social norms help cohere cooperation and reduce violence.
But there's a difference between social hierarchy and morality, right?
Well, the claim that I want to make is that much of the moral judgments that we make are actually completely unconscious, and that consciousness in some sense may be part of an illusion that we are confronted with a situation that's moral in some way, about harming or helping somebody, and unconsciously and intuitively we generate a judgment about what's right or wrong. And then we try to reconstruct because we always want to justify our actions. But the actual judgment may have come about through completely unconscious and intuitive processes. And I mean, here's sort of an analogy, I think, to make the unconscious part salient. Although it's true that in grammar school you learned about the structure of a sentence, about nouns and verbs and adjectives and how to conjugate, if you actually thought about what you learned in grammar every time you spoke, you would get nowhere, right? Because if you have to think, well, I need a noun now, and now I need an adjective, you're not going to say anything. I think the same thing is absolutely true when it comes to the moral sphere. If we actually had to call up all the principles consciously all the time to make a decision, we probably wouldn't act very much at all. So I think a lot of the processing is intuitive, unconscious, and the stronger part of the argument that we want to make is that it's not simply unconscious in the sense that our school grammar is unconscious, in other words, something we once learned but now has become habitual, but rather unconscious in a completely impenetrable way, like the sort of the formal rules in linguistics that define what becomes a grammatical sentence or not.